The central hub of almost any home theater is going to be the AVR or the standalone AV processor. And here in my home theater, up until 6 months ago, I used exclusively home theater AVRs. That is until I purchased my first standalone processor, which is what we're going to talk about here today. That processor is this, the Emotiva UMC-1 that I picked up off of eBay. And now, after 6 months of use here in my home theater, I'm going to make this video and tell you guys about some of the positives, some of the negatives, and ultimately why I've decided to take this out of my home theater and sell it and go in another direction. So let's get into it and let's talk about this Emotiva UMC-1 AV processor. To start with, let's talk about some specs on this processor and a little bit of background. Like most things here in my home theater, this Emotiva processor is about 15 years old. It is an older piece of technology. I do not know the exact release date, manufacture date on this processor. I don't believe there is info on here. No, I don't see a badge or anything about the release date or production date on it. But from looking online, the oldest reviews I can find for this processor is somewhere in the range of 2010 to 2011. So right around 14, 15 years ago in terms of this production date for these units. And while inherently that isn't necessarily a bad thing, because I do think this has its positive qualities, it does have some drawbacks because of its age. And we'll get into that here shortly. But to also talk about physical dimensions, this is not an overly large piece of equipment. It's not as big as some high-end AVRs or some high-end real power-heavy like power amplifiers or anything. It's a rather moderate, I guess, piece of equipment. So when you look at this here, it is about 17 inches wide, 13 inches long, and about 4 inches, just under 4 inches thick, tall. So it's not an overly large piece of equipment, like I said. When you look at the physical unit itself, it just has black metal and silver accents. It's nothing overly flashy. It does have some blue LED backlighting on the front panel and a blue and black kind of LED screen that's on here. It has a few buttons on the front for your input selection. It has your volume knob. And like I said, the screen is up here. So nothing overly complicated, nothing too distracting, I guess, in terms of the actual appearance here. It just looks like a standard piece of home theater technology that would fit nicely in an AV rack or on a shelf, kind of out of the way. It's not going to draw too much attention to itself. Now, moving to the back, to all the connections. This is one of the positives that I will say about this piece of equipment here, is it has a lot of connections on the back. It has 5 HDMI inputs, 1 HDMI out. It has multiple analog inputs for your stereo audio inputs on there. It has multiple digital audio inputs, so it has 4 coax RCA style digital inputs and 3 Toslink optical inputs on here as well. Now, also talking about audio, it has a 7.1 channel direct input on here, which is really nice and was one of the reasons why I picked this up. It also has a 7 channel output on here, which would be to go to your power amplifier, whatever you're going to use for that. And it includes a balanced subwoofer output. So if you have a subwoofer that uses a balanced connection, you can use that on here as well. It also has component video, HDMI, as I said just a second ago, and both composite and S-video inputs as well. So there is a lot of inputs in such a small form factor for this piece of equipment. And like I said, that is one of the positives that I had for this unit here, was that it had a lot of inputs for a lot of different devices. Now let's move on and talk about the positives that I had, the positive takeaways with this processor, having it here in my home theater setup. As I said just a second ago, the number of connections is a positive because it has a variety of connections that you can use to connect various devices to this processor. Going along with that, another positive is the level of customization for this unit. This processor here doesn't have dedicated inputs necessarily. What it has when you pull up the menu system is just custom auxiliary inputs. That's what they're listed in the system, which allows you to customize every single input to your liking. So what I mean by these custom inputs is that instead of having just a dedicated DVD, video game, Blu-ray player, TV or satellite input like you see on a lot of receivers, the menu system just has these aux inputs that allow you to customize everything. So you can take any video source and any audio source and assign it to any of the inputs that's in there, and even duplicate or reuse them on multiple inputs within the system. An example of how this customization really became useful for me is with my Laserdisc player, because I was able to duplicate the same video input, the same composite or S-video input that I was using for my Laserdisc player, put it on two different connections in the actual system, two different inputs in the system, and then change the audio source. So one audio source could be my 7.1 direct input for my AC3 audio, and then I could have a second selection in the system for PCM stereo. So that way, if I wasn't watching an AC3 Laserdisc, I was still able to get the PCM stereo audio. And I didn't have to go in and like select stereo or 7.1 on the dedicated input every time I was switching between formats. Now, the customization wasn't just limited to all the customized inputs that are on this. It also allows you to customize the different settings for your speakers, the configuration, your crossover settings. It also has a lot of settings for like your crossover sloping and drop off for different frequencies within your speaker settings. But it really just allows a lot of customization in general. And that is another big positive that goes along with the number of inputs that are on here, is that it just allows for a lot of customization to where you can set this up pretty much however you want. Just the overall audio and video quality, for the most part, is pretty good on this and really gives you a pretty decent experience. Although that is what's going to segue and transition us into the negatives about this unit, and ultimately the big negative that kind of pushed me away from taking this out of my setup. The first one is kind of minor, nothing too like deal breaking for me, but I did notice the audio settings always seem to feel kind of weird with this. So when I was kind of going through changing my crossover settings for my speakers, I just never could seem to get things to sound right. And that is in terms of like the cutoff between my speakers and my subwoofers. Now, granted, my subs are not incredibly like deep or incredibly like powerful or anything. I've made some content on them that'll be linked here or at the end of the video. They're Polk PSW-10s. They're very budget friendly, so they're nothing overly powerful for a home theater. But with this processor, I always seem to have a problem of getting the crossover settings perfect. It just always seemed like my center channel, especially in my LCRs, just always seemed to like not dig low enough to where it was crossing over and you were getting just too much higher pitch, like too many higher pitched sounds coming out of the subs, or it was like a weird cutoff to where you were only getting super low audio out of the subs, and my LCRs were straining to try and like dig deep into bass, and it was jumbling up the audio. And that was only really ever apparent in my home theater with this processor. Every other AVR I've ever really used here in my home theater, I've never had that issue. But that did come up here, and it was somewhat annoying from time to time. The audio would seem, like I said, off at certain points, and I'd have to mess with the settings. It seemed like more than I should. But that wasn't the big deal breaker for me. The big deal breaker came with some video processing issues that you cannot overcome and you cannot defeat. And more specifically, just standard 480i definition video processing. So if you were using any of the HDMI inputs, it didn't seem like there was any issues to the video processing. Everything looked clean. There was no distortion. There was no clipping. There was no kind of like aspect ratio adjustments or anything. Everything looked good and just looked serviceable enough and looked, like some quality video processing on here. The issue comes in when you go to the standard definition connections. And what I found out through trial and error between my Laserdisc player, my VCR, and looking at some forum posts online from years and years ago, what this has essentially is some undefeatable video processing that's just inherent in the system for standard definition video sources. And there's no way to defeat it and get around it. And ultimately what it does is it blows up the image. Instead of keeping a standard 4:3 image aspect ratio in its standard kind of definition to like a square box on your screen, it takes that image and blows it up to 16:9 and stretches it out and expands it and tries to add some just image processing stuff on top of it. And there's no way to get around that. When I talked about in my previous Laserdisc content about how S-video looked better than composite, that really comes down to the image processing on this unit. And S-video just seemed to look better, though it still was just barely serviceable for me. It didn't really look overly clear or sharp or anything, and I just chalked that up to the nature of Laserdisc. And I just assumed that was just what it was. It was what it was going to be. But after playing around with this and just running a direct video line from my Laserdisc player into my Onkyo receiver that I have here and just bypassing this processor completely just as a test, I found out that both the S-video and the composite video looked way better going through my Onkyo receiver I have that I was just using as a power amplifier. And once I found that out, I also played around with my VCR, did the same thing, and it just looked way better. And so ultimately at the end of the day, that pushed me to get rid of this here in my setup because I realized I was doing myself a disservice with my Laserdisc content by using this and its weird, undefeatable video processing. And really the big reason why I'm getting rid of this is that issue right there. It's the fact that you can't get around the video processing on standard definition sources. If you had one of these and you were strictly going to use HDMI, then I don't think you'd have much of an issue. Everything else seems to work really well for the most part. Like I said, I did have a few of those audio issues that crept up every once in a while with crossover settings. But really, for the most part, everything else works pretty good, pretty nice for a unit that's 15 years old out there. But if you get into standard definition video, this thing is not the way to go, and that's ultimately the biggest issue with it. Now, I also want to mention, just briefly, where do I go from here in my home theater now that I decided to remove this processor out of the setup? And really, for the time being, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my Onkyo SR805 receiver that I was using as a glorified power amplifier. And honestly, the quality and everything has been much improved from getting away from this Emotiva receiver and going straight into the Onkyo. Now, it's for a later video. I'm not going to get into it here because I don't want to ramble too long. I had to play around with my HDMI inputs a little bit because there's only 3 inputs on the Onkyo receiver where there's 5 on this processor here. So I had to be creative with how I kind of set up all my HDMI connections, but that's for a future video. But at the end of the day, the audio is much improved because the crossover settings and just audio management in the Onkyo is just a lot better, in my opinion, than what this Emotiva has. But the big thing is the video processing. HDMI still looks fine on the Onkyo, same as it did on this Emotiva. There's not a huge change there. But the big thing is the analog video. It just looks way better. So much so that I went away from S-video and went to composite because that really does look better. And it looks on par now with DVD or maybe even slightly exceeding DVD in some cases. And that just, I think, comes down to the undefeatable processing issues that the Emotiva has. And the Onkyo doesn't have that. So for right now, that's what I'm kind of going to stick with. Maybe down the road, there might be a new processor or something that may come in here, depending on if I find something that's a good enough deal that has good enough kind of reviews about it with the image processing. I'm definitely going to do my kind of due diligence with that if I decide to go that route. But at least for the near future, the Onkyo receiver is going to handle everything like what I've done in the past with just a standard AVR. And with that, we're going to wrap this video up. I'm going to say thank you to everyone out there. Definitely let me know down below in a comment if you like this type of content. I kind of vary things up here on my channel from like media reviews and just other offhanded kind of home theater topics. But let me know if you enjoy stuff like this. I have more content in the vein of this in the works that's kind of going on right now in the background that should be on the channel soon. Also be on the lookout. I have a special video coming up for Star Wars Day, May 4th. It will date this slightly, but that video should be out next on the feed, so be on the lookout for that. Also, leave a comment down below. Let me know if you've had one of these Emotiva processors, you know, what you use in your home theater, if it's a standalone processor, if it's an AVR. Let me know your thoughts on that. Again, let me know if you've had one of these and your thoughts on using one of these specific processors in your home theater. And ultimately, at the end of the day, if you like this content, please feel free to like and subscribe to the channel. It really does help me out, helps me grow the channel, helps me kind of get in the algorithm more and reach out to more people. So with that, I'm done rambling. Hopefully you enjoyed this video, and I will see you the next time in the next video right here on Secondhand Home Theater. Thank you.